a frozen island, 56,000 people, and beneath the ice, $4 trillion worth of resources that could reshape the global balance of power. Donald Trump just told the world he's willing to deploy the U.S. military to take Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally America has fought alongside for decades. And while most people dismiss this as another outrageous Trump statement, something changed. After U.S. Special Forces extracted Venezuela's president in an operation that took less time than watching a movie, the White House doubled down. Utilizing the U.S. military, they said, is always an option. This isn't a joke. This isn't about ego. And if you follow the money, you'll see exactly why Greenland might be worth starting a war over. Because what's happening right now isn't being driven by Trump's impulsiveness. It's being driven by a hidden economic war that's been building for decades. This is the real reason Trump plans to take Greenland. Let me start with what most people don't realize about Greenland. It's massive. We're talking about the world's largest island, over 3 times bigger than Texas. But despite its size, the entire population is just 56,000 people. That's smaller than the crowd at a major college football game, spread across an area the size of France, Germany, and Spain combined. For more than 300 years, Greenland has been controlled by Denmark, and for most of that time, it was considered completely worthless, a frozen wasteland that cost Denmark money to maintain and gave almost nothing back. The Danish government sends Greenland $500 million every single year just to keep the territory functioning. That subsidy accounts for 20% of Greenland's entire GDP and half of their government's budget. Without Denmark's money, Greenland's economy would collapse overnight. But here's where the story gets interesting. Trump's obsession with Greenland isn't new. Back in 2019, during his first term, he floated the idea of buying the island from Denmark. The Danish Prime Minister called the suggestion absurd, and the whole thing became a punchline on late-night TV. Then Trump went quiet about it. For years, Greenland barely came up, until recently. Shortly after U.S. forces captured Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro in a military operation that shocked the world, Trump started talking about Greenland again. But this time, the tone was different. This time, when asked if he would rule out using military force, Trump refused to answer. The White House press secretary put it even more bluntly: acquiring Greenland is a national security priority for the United States, and utilizing the U.S. military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. So what changed? Why would a U.S. president threaten military action against one of America's closest allies over a frozen island that most Americans couldn't find on a map? The answer is simple. What's under the ice? In 2008, researchers from the U.S. Geological Survey made a discovery that would eventually change everything. They estimated that Greenland could contain 52 billion barrels of oil. To put that in perspective, the United States, the world's largest oil producer, has proven reserves of about 47 billion barrels. But that's just the beginning. Greenland is also home to the 6th largest uranium deposit ever discovered on Earth. That single deposit contains more uranium than has been found in the entire United States. And then there are the rare earth minerals. The U.S. government maintains a list of 50 minerals that are considered critical to America's economy and national security. Greenland has 43 of them, including massive, world-leading deposits of lithium and graphite, 2 elements that are absolutely essential for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, and advanced military technology. When you add it all up, geologists estimate that Greenland is sitting on more than $4 trillion worth of exploitable resources. But here's the part that should concern you. There's one country that already controls most of these resources worldwide, and it's not the United States. China currently dominates the global supply of rare earth minerals. They control 60% of all rare earth mining and 90% of all rare earth processing. That means nearly every smartphone, Every electric vehicle, every F-35 fighter jet, and every piece of advanced technology depends on minerals that China controls. If China wanted to, they could cut off America's access to these materials tomorrow. And there's almost nothing the US could do about it. Greenland represents the only viable way to break that monopoly. It's the only place outside of China with the reserves necessary to challenge Chinese dominance. And everyone knows it. In October 2025, China sent its first commercial ship through the so-called Polar Silk Road, a new Arctic shipping route that cuts travel time from Asia to Europe by 40% and reduces fuel costs by 20%. China has already invested billions of dollars in Greenland's infrastructure, positioning themselves to eventually gain access to these resources. This is why the Pentagon is panicking, because if China secures privileged access to Greenland's minerals, they won't just maintain their monopoly, they'll lock it in for the next century. And that's a scenario the United States simply cannot accept. But the resources under the ice are only part of the story, because something else is happening in Greenland that's just as important. Climate change is opening the Arctic. The Arctic Ocean is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Permanent sea ice that's covered the region for all of human history is now retreating at an accelerating pace. And that's creating something that didn't exist before: new shipping routes. Right now, if you want to ship goods from Asia to Europe, you have 2 options. You can go through the Suez Canal, or you can go around Africa. Both routes are long, expensive, and vulnerable to disruption. But as Arctic ice melts, new passages are opening up. The Northern Sea Route along Russia's coast, the Northwest Passage through Canada. And by 2050, analysts believe even the Transpolar Sea Route straight through the North Pole will become navigable for large cargo ships. These aren't minor shortcuts. We're talking about routes that could cut weeks off shipping times and save millions of dollars in fuel costs. And 80% of global trade travels by sea. Whoever controls these Arctic routes will have enormous leverage over global commerce. Greenland sits right in the middle of all of them. Over the last decade alone, Arctic shipping traffic has increased by 30%. That number is only going to grow. And as it does, Greenland's strategic value grows with it. This is why Trump keeps saying Greenland is essential for national security. It's not just about the resources. It's about controlling the trade routes of the future. Routes that could eventually become more valuable than the Suez Canal. And right now, Denmark, a country with a smaller military than some US states, is responsible for defending them. So if Greenland is sitting on trillions of dollars worth of resources, why hasn't it become a wealthy, independent nation already? That's where things get complicated. Despite having one of the most resource-rich territories on Earth, Greenland currently has only 1 active mine. There are 170 exploration sites where companies are drilling and surveying, but actual extraction remains minimal. The problem is infrastructure. Greenland's terrain is brutally harsh. 4/5 of the island is covered by a permanent ice sheet up to 2 miles thick. The population is scattered across small coastal towns, none of which are connected by roads. The only way to travel between settlements is by plane, boat, or snowmobile. Building the infrastructure required to mine these resources at scale would cost billions of dollars, money that Greenland simply doesn't have. There's another problem too. Greenland's labor market is impossibly tight. Unemployment is just 0.2%. The workforce is tiny, and 43% of workers are already employed by the government. There's essentially no spare labor capacity. According to Greenlandic officials, an average mining operation requires about 300 experienced workers. With a total population of 56,000, that means a single mine would increase the island's population by 0.5%. 10 mines would increase it by 5%. So if Greenland wants to exploit its resources, it would need to import massive numbers of foreign workers. And that creates its own set of problems. namely the risk that foreign laborers eventually outnumber the local Inuit population, fundamentally changing the island's demographics and culture. This is Greenland's trap. They want independence from Denmark, but they can't afford it. They're sitting on enormous wealth, but they can't access it alone, which means they need a partner. And that's where Trump sees an opening. But there's another factor that's making this moment even more volatile: Denmark's colonial legacy. Between the 1960s and 1970s, the Danish government carried out a birth control program in Greenland. Thousands of Inuit women and girls had IUDs forcibly inserted, often without their knowledge or consent. The Danish government claimed it was to control birth rates and reduce costs. Greenland's current prime minister has called it genocide. 67 women are currently suing the Danish government, and in a population of just 56,000 people, this scandal has reignited calls for independence. Recent polling shows that 67% of Greenlanders now support breaking away from Denmark. The next election is coming soon, and independence is the central issue. Denmark needs Greenland to remain a significant Arctic power. Greenland wants independence but lacks the money. And Trump is betting he can exploit that gap. So how does Trump actually plan to acquire Greenland? There are essentially three paths forward. Option 1, the purchase. The Economist recently published a crude valuation of Greenland and estimated it would be worth approximately $50 billion in a direct sale. That's less than half of the U.S. annual military budget. With that money, the United States could theoretically pay every single Greenlander roughly $1 million in cash. Every resident becomes an instant millionaire, and Greenland becomes American territory. The problem? Both Denmark and Greenland have repeatedly stated the island is not for sale.
Dear President Trump, listen very carefully. Greenland have been part of the Danish kingdom for 800 years. It's an integrated part of our country. It is not for sale.
Option 2, the deal. This is the more likely scenario. It's called a Compact of Free Association, or COFA. The United States already has this arrangement with 3 Pacific Island nations: Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and Palau. Under COFA, these countries are fully independent. They have their own governments, their own laws, and their own vote at the United Nations, Chinese or Russian influence, all while maintaining access to American economic support. And for the U.S., it would mean securing military bases, critical mineral rights, and control over Arctic shipping routes without the political fallout of an outright annexation. Several pro-independence Greenlandic politicians have already expressed interest in this model. Option 3, the threat. This is the option that has Europe terrified. Trump's team has made it clear they're not ruling out military force. After the Venezuela operation proved that U.S. special forces could topple a foreign government in a matter of hours, the calculus has changed. Denmark has roughly 200 troops stationed in Greenland. The United States has the most powerful military on Earth. In a purely military sense, occupying Greenland would take less than a day. But the consequences would be catastrophic. It would shatter NATO, destroy America's alliances with Europe, and set a precedent that legitimizes territorial conquest by force, something that would directly benefit Russia in Ukraine and China with Taiwan. Most analysts believe Trump is using the military threat as leverage, not as an actual plan. But the fact that it's even being discussed shows just how serious this has become. So here's what I think is really happening. Trump doesn't need to invade Greenland. He just needs to make every other option worse. Phase 1 is already underway. Apply pressure. By publicly threatening military action and refusing to rule out force, Trump creates chaos. Denmark is forced to respond by increasing defense spending, which they just did, committing an additional $1.5 billion to Arctic defense. Meanwhile, the pro-independence movement in Greenland gets amplified. The more Trump talks about Greenland, the more Greenlanders start questioning why they're still tied to Denmark. Phase 2 will come next. Make the offer. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is already scheduled to meet with both Danish and Greenlandic leaders. Behind closed doors, the U.S. will present a deal. Probably some version of the COFA arrangement. Independence, sovereignty, economic support, and military protection. The offer will be designed to be better than anything Denmark can provide, and it'll be framed as protection from China and Russia, not as a takeover. Phase 3 is the leverage. If Denmark resists, Trump has options. Tariffs, reduced NATO commitments, diplomatic isolation. He's already floated these ideas publicly. And if Greenland pushes for full independence without American backing, Trump will make sure they understand the alternative. Going it alone means facing China and Russia without protection. And in a world where, as Trump advisor Stephen Miller put it, strength, force, and power govern everything, that's not a viable option. Trump doesn't need to conquer Greenland. He just needs to be the only acceptable choice. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. For 300 years, Greenland was dismissed, a frozen, expensive liability that Denmark kept out of colonial inertia. But climate change didn't just melt the ice. It revealed what was always underneath: the resources that will define the 21st century, the shipping routes that will replace the Panama and Suez canals, and the strategic position that sits between North America, Europe, and Russia. The United States knows it, China knows it, Russia knows it, and 56,000 Greenlanders are now caught in the middle of the biggest geopolitical chess match since the Cold War. If the U.S. acquires Greenland, it breaks China's stranglehold on critical minerals. It secures control over future Arctic trade routes, and it becomes the largest territorial expansion in American history since the Louisiana Purchase. Trump's legacy would be cemented forever, but it would also shatter NATO, alienate Europe, and set a precedent that might make right, something that directly benefits authoritarian regimes around the world. If China or Russia gain privileged access instead, they lock in their mineral monopolies, control the Arctic, and box the United States out of the most valuable trade routes of the future. And if Greenland goes fully independent without a strong partner, there's a significant risk of corruption, foreign exploitation, and Chinese Belt and Road debt traps that have ensnared developing nations across Africa and Asia. This isn't a question of if Greenland's status changes. It's a question of when and to whom. Trump's approach isn't subtle. He's betting that by making the alternatives unthinkable, Greenland will eventually choose America. Whether it's billions in investment, military protection, or the implicit threat of being left vulnerable to hostile powers, the pressure is designed to leave only one acceptable outcome. The age of territorial expansion isn't over. It's just moved north. So what do you think happens next? Does Greenland stay with Denmark, join the United States through a deal, or go fully independent and risk everything? More importantly, if you were one of those 56,000 Greenlanders, what would you choose? Because that choice will shape the next century of global power. Let me know in the comments what you think Trump's real endgame is here. And if this kind of analysis is valuable to you, the stuff they're not talking about in the mainstream news, hit subscribe, because the forces reshaping our world don't wait for permission. And neither should you. This is just the beginning.